Thank you. Thanks, Wyatt. Thanks, Khaki, Kevin, all the staff. It's great to be back in such wonderful company. I am going to read from a new novel. I am rounding third and halfway home. So I felt like I could read from it. My apologies to a couple of you in the audience who may have heard me read from this part. If so, you have all permission to take a little snooze. The novel is called Life After Life, and it engages a lot of different voices, some only once. Tonight I hope to give you a couple of the more primary characters. All of the characters in the novel are, for whatever reason, starting up in something very new. So several of the characters are living in a retirement community, as is true for the first person you'll hear from. Her name is Sadie. I think the only explanation you need for her is there's a man, Stanley Stone, who comes into the chapter, and what you need to know about Stanley is he's kind of faking or exaggerating dementia so his son will leave him alone and go get a life. She refers to her business, which is she has people bring photographs, and she kind of does Photoshop with scissors and glue. She takes people to places they've never been. She imposes their images in family photographs where they missed the event. That's her business, and a lot of kind other residents kind of line up and keep her busy, very, very busy. And then there is reference to the resident cat, a cat named Harley, who was very well loved until that news story several years ago where there was the cat in the nursing home who just happened to curl up next to whoever was about to die. And it has ruined Harley's existence. So he's basically met with cups and slippers and shrieks. So I think that's all you need to know about Sadie. And as I say, first time off the tongue, it's the first night. It's a wine night. And so if I'm slower than I anticipated, I'll cut off the other one. But we'll start and see how it goes. Sadie. Sadie Randolph has always seen the sunnier side of life, and she's not sure why that is, just that it is. People criticize it. A lot of people don't like looking at a half-full glass, but she has spent her life doing just that and feels now that she is 85 and bound to a wheelchair she wouldn't have chosen to live any other way. Even now, there are things to be happy about. She was born to good people. She got to go to school and become a school teacher, which many of the people she grew up with were not so fortunate to do. She married a nice boy from right there in the county who she had known her whole life, and he continued to run the hardware store and feed and grain sales just like his father and grandfather before him. They had 3 fine children, all college educated and now with families of their own, lived in a 2-story brick house across the street from the Methodist church, which they attended, and she taught the 3rd grade for 40 years. Horace died young, a sudden heart attack while playing football on Thanksgiving afternoon. It was what he and their sons did every Thanksgiving, a town pickup game known for years as the Giblet Gravy Bowl. He dropped dead, and he couldn't help that. He looked to be in great shape, and there was no warning whatsoever. And of course she was angry and scared at first, and then so heartbroken and disappointed, but he couldn't help it. She had to keep going. At the funeral, she told people she felt lucky and blessed to have ever had him at all. She feels the same about her mother, who also died young. She would never trade a minute she had with them. The pain of losing someone you love is the price of the ticket for getting to know them at all. Horace once told her that if something ever happened to him, that she should go find somebody. But she was sure he didn't really mean that, especially when he added, "But they better be every bit as good as I am." Well, then that's impossible, isn't it? She had said. It was 8 years before he died, a plain old night in the winter of 1963, the whole world so focused on the young Jackie Kennedy and what on earth she would do now. Sadie almost asked what he would do if she were the one to die young, but she didn't want to go there. She doesn't even like to go there now, with her 85 and him dead nearly 40 years. Of course he would have found someone else, but ultimately it was her left behind, and she didn't want to think about any of it. When she doesn't want to think about something sad or hurtful, she does what she instructed her own children and those she taught to do. Close your eyes and go somewhere safe and good. One child even made up a big sign with what he thought were the rules to being happy. Pretend you ain't dirty from playing, even if you are. Think good thoughts. Think about an animal you'd like to have. She hung the rules in the front of her classroom, and they stayed there for years. Now the boy who wrote them is very rich and owns a horse farm in Montana. Sadie has gotten a Christmas card from him every single year except the one time he was getting a divorce. He always says his work keeps him very dirty, but it never gets in the way of his happiness. Sadie herself had always wanted a little dog that would follow her from room to room like a shadow, and that is exactly what she got after Horace died. She loved the big yellow Labradors they had always had as a family, Honey and Goldie and Spitz, after the swimmer who won all those medals. But Rudy was all hers, a little Pekingese who she misses to this day. But sometimes if she lays her sweater just right at the foot of her bed, it looks just like him. And sometimes she can even get to a place in her mind where she can hear him snore. She loves when Harley comes meowing at her door and spends some time purring on her lap. Bless poor Harley, the way he's treated these days. She wants to tell those who are so mean to him that the person they should really fear coming and sitting beside them is little Joanna Lamb. She's the one who comes to usher out those ready to go. She's the real sweet angel of death, and Sadie suspects is very good at her job. She was always a fine student, even though she had some trouble finding her way. She liked to do jobs like beat the erasers or straighten up the cloakroom, and Sadie assigned her these things often in hopes it would build some confidence. Her parents were fine, hard-working people, but they were hard on Joanna to succeed, maybe too hard. Some children just can't take that. Some just don't have the makeup, and they need to be handled in a gentler way. Joanna was one of those who always looked like she needed a hug, and Sadie was big on hugging. Now they have all kinds of rules about hugging. Children used to bah when Joanna came in the classroom, and there were some who wanted to always make her sit beside Bo Henderson, a tiny boy with a terrible stutter, who some of the children who had not grown out of being mean called Pete. He turned out fine too, went to a school that broke down and rebuilt his voice, grew to be over 6 feet tall, started selling high-end real estate, and now could buy and sell most every one of those who were cruel to him. Some people struggle harder than others, and that has always been true. Take a classroom of 8-year-olds. Some will be good readers and not mind a bit standing and performing. Others cannot put any expression into it because they are having to concentrate so hard on each and every word. Each child moves in his own way, she often told parents. My job is to help that child find his natural speed and not to pit him against another. She tried to teach her children to be positive, to dream, but to also do it with their feet on the ground. If you let loose that balloon, you will lose sight of it, she said. The best way to enjoy it is to hold tight to the string and plant your feet on a good, solid path. She thinks now that maybe part of why she was so happy and positive is because she saw so much that was not good. She got to be quite good at figuring out which children were neglected at home, but then she was never sure what to do with that information except to love them a little more, hold them close whenever the opportunity allowed. Sometimes it was hard to be cordial to parents she suspected of misdeeds, and it was hard not to quiz the children a little too much. People think it's a problem of economics, but that's not always true. There can be just as much neglect and abuse in a big fine house with professional parents as out in the trailer park. Alcohol is alcohol and meanness is meanness. An 8-year-old heart is just an innocent 8-year-old heart, fragile and wanting. She got tired of all the younger teachers coming through and saying how old-fashioned she was because she still believed in dictionaries and manners. And she didn't like the shift away from just good old pencils and paper and regular spelling tests. She hated this creative spelling mess. She loved cursive and phonics. For years, her favorite thing was the lessons in cursive, taking children from a world of boxy print letters to beautiful script. It was like teaching a language, and suddenly notes home and envelopes in their mailboxes didn't seem so foreign and foreboding. Learning and facing language teaches children to learn and face other things. She did not learn the computer with only one more year before her retirement. The typewriter and overhead projector were just fine to get her to the finish line of a long and lovely race. And she loved spending time on manners. Those boys busting to be first in line. "Slow down," she would say, "there's no fire." But it was like they couldn't help themselves, like those jumping bean bodies were on fire, and she was constantly needing to remind them to use their indoor voices. She said that all the time and still does. There are people here at Pine Haven who need to be told to use their indoor voices, not to touch or invade the space of their neighbors, and to please slow down. "Where's the fire?" she asks Stanley Stone all the time when he goes tearing down the hall to be first at the cafeteria. "Please just tell me where's the fire." Of course, poor Stanley is not the best example since his mind is so far gone, but at least he's on foot. It's those in wheelchairs like herself who are so dangerous when they pick up speed. "Please use your manners," she often says. "Were you raised in a barn?" There was a time when a child who squirmed too much in class was thought to have worms, but now they call it ADD. "Worms?" little Abby from next door asked one day when Sadie told this, and Toby, one of the residents, had to tell the full tale of how children's bottoms got checked at night with a flashlight to see if they had pinworms. "Not in Boston, they didn't," Rachel Silverman said, and everybody laughed. Someone Sadie taught with used to say to children right there before the others, "You need to have your bottom checked." And that child was likely embarrassed to death. Even an overly confident child would have to find that humiliating. Sadie told the teacher she thought that was a very unkind way to handle the problem. She was the same woman who taught what an improper fraction was by first making the smallest boy in the class, Edward Tyner, sit on her lap, and she would say, "Proper," and then she'd turn and sit on top of him and say, "Improper." The children, of course, thought it was hilarious, yet Edward never did do very well in life, and Sadie has always thought this was likely a factor. Sadie has always tried to observe a code of ethics and manners. "Mom," her youngest son Paul had said years ago, "just fart once so we know you aren't an alien." They were in the kitchen. He was working on homework and she was frying country-style steak. He was so full of himself and got away with so much because he was the baby. Horace would have been home any minute, and she would have heard this car and seen Honey go running. She would love to see his face. That would be the most wonderful thing that could happen. And sometimes she can feel him there. Sometimes when she's almost asleep, she feels his head heavy on her shoulder and his breath on her neck. "Who said aliens don't also break wind?" she asked, and Paul screamed with laughter. It's hard to believe a boy so obsessed with body sounds and what he could mine in his nose has grown up to be an ophthalmologist, but he has. And she has his picture right there on her dresser with his wife, Phoebe, and their beautiful babies. They live on the West Coast, which is where Phoebe's from, and they always send her lots and lots of pictures. One time they sent a package that got wet, and when she opened it, one picture had stuck to another, and when she carefully pulled them apart, it was like a double exposure. The picture of her youngest grandson had somehow wound up there in the picture of Paul and Phoebe on their anniversary trip to Europe. He had stayed right here in Fulton, North Carolina, with her, but the picture said he was in Paris, France. There is such power in what you see that way. She said, "Look, he's in Paris with his mom and dad." And that is what, all these years later, gave her the whole idea for her business, which she calls exposure. It was so hard not to believe what she saw right there before her eyes. The business was suggested to her by Joanna Lamb, who sometimes comes to visit after she's left the nursing wing where she has helped someone cross over. She told Sadie that some days she has to re-enter life slowly, like someone coming up from a deep dive, so he won't get the bends. Lord, the bends. She has learned so much from that crazy Paul that she wouldn't know otherwise. He loves to scuba dive, and he's jumped from a plane too, which scares her to this minute to imagine, so she never thinks about that. And if her mind tries to, she conjures up little Rudy with his scruffy flat face and maybe sings a song in her head. Lots of times all she can think is those instrumental songs from that album Stanley Stone plays all day long, each and every day. An album that was popular back when her kids were little. Herb, Somebody or Another, loud drum beats and lots of horns. Tijuana. It gets stuck in her head and won't go away. Catchy songs that make her want to sip a highball or smoke a cigarette. Things she's only done a couple of times in her whole life. Stanley Stone suggested Sadie call her business Indecent Exposure. And of course, she politely told him she would do no such thing. It's hard to watch him decline so, and she goes the extra mile to be kind and courteous. She's known him her whole adult life, a highly intelligent and respectable man who now says all kinds of things, ugly things, the kinds of things you would hear teaching junior high school, which she did once in 1965, and then went running and begging to be placed back with her third graders. People get old, but in the eyes they might as well be 8. Always they are about 8. And so Sadie is well versed in 8-year-old fear. She knows the heart of 8-year-olds and believes when all is said and done and hard times come, that's how old we are in the heart, forever 8 years old. She used to love to set up the abacus at the front of the room and have children tell what they know of their lives, one bead at a time. Holding to the little round wooden bead gave them confidence as they spoke the facts of their lives. I was born in Raleigh. I have a sister. I have a dog. I love grits. I hate mayonnaise. Things like that. They loved seeing the beads accumulate, transferring over to the 10 spot. It was a lesson in math and English. It was a lesson in socializing. Yesterday, she took Stanley Stone's photo he brought and put him in the ring with a wrestler man he called the Undertaker. A horrible-looking big man with long, stringy hair and ghoulish eyes. "Stanley, how is Ned doing?" she asked while cutting and gluing. "Okay, I guess. He's teaching at your old school. Weren't you at Sandhills Elementary?" "I was indeed, except that one year they sent me to junior high. 40 years at Sandhills." She was so relieved to feel like the old Stanley was back. He was relaxed in the chair, his eyes closed. You know, isn't it funny how in life our paths didn't cross? I mean, if you needed a hammer, you went to our store, and I suspect if we'd ever needed your kind of legal advice, we would have gone to you. She had to pause to carefully cut out the Undertaker, who was so ugly it was frightening. But we went to different churches, and between my teaching and all I did at home, I didn't venture very far, so I really never knew your Martha at all except to say hello at the store. And I didn't get to teach Ned. He was in Renee Bingham's class, but I recall all the children saying how he made everybody laugh. He was definitely the class clown. He had a hard time in those years. Stanley opened an eye, and then it was like a switch flipped and something blew into him. And he sat up and started talking about the wrestling event he was going to have right there in the common room. He shook his fist, and all signs of nice Stanley were gone. "I'm going to take somebody out," he said, and she waved her hand, tried to see if she couldn't lure him back to where he had been. She used her best teacher voice and told him to sit down and behave that very instant, or he would be sent home and not allowed to return. When she looked up, he was seated and staring at his fist. What I was saying is how I was thinking that we're neighbors all over again, but this time we seem to speak and talk more than we ever did in our other lives. Yes. Sadie waited for him to calm down and relax. Her ceiling fan clicked and clacked, and sometimes what she hears it say is, "I think I can, I think I can," just like the little engine that could. Now that is a powerful message for children to hear and learn. Where do people think the president got it in the first place? "Yes, we can" is just another way to say what the little engine said a long, long time ago. Most everything worth saying has already been said, so the trick is to make it sound new, something a child will find interesting or funny. "I miss my other life," she told Stanley, and worked to arrange the undertaker's hand so it looked like he was choking Stanley, which is what Stanley had requested. "I miss my kitchen and my black and white linoleum floor. My children like to play hopscotch there or throw a beach towel over a chair to make a little Indian teepee. They love their Matchbox cars. Do you remember Ned at that age? The way a child will make all sorts of sounds with their teeth and their tongues, sounds that nobody else is following? I do. I move room to room through my old house. I see the brightness of a late afternoon. I hear the rumble of the air conditioning there in the window in the den. I see the hollyhocks at my window, tall and staked upright with their big powder puff blooms. And then just as suddenly I might smell the fire in the fireplace and hear Horace chopping wood. Do it, Stanley. Close your eyes and start wandering." She waited until he closed his eyes, and then she continued. She couldn't wait to get back. "You will be amazed at what all you can see. The seasons change, the light, the temperature, and then people come into the room and you hear the sweet voices of your young children, or I smell the cologne I wore for almost 20 years, a gift from Horace every Christmas, Shalimar." Just the word made me feel important. And one day when a little girl, Susie Otis, there in bright-colored dungarees, told me I smelled so good, I had the whole room say, "Shalimar, Shalimar." They waved their hands like they held magic wands. I can smell the grilled cheese sandwiches my kids love for me to make. I cut them in the shape of stars and hearts, and I let Goldie wolf down the scraps. And sometimes it snows. It gets so quiet and beautiful in the snow. And Horace is always there when it snows. And sometimes I hear Horace clear his throat. I see him pat his chest for heartburn. He said it was just a little heartburn. And why didn't I know? So many people get the heartburn, and especially at Thanksgiving with all that food. Why didn't I know? And I have to get past that. I have to tiptoe past him right there in the kitchen. I have to get back to a good place. And oh my goodness, there is that silly, silly Paul wearing a costume I made him one Halloween. He's a sea monkey. All he wanted to be was a sea monkey. And I made him a funny merman-looking suit complete with a scepter and a crown. And there I am right there in front of Horace's mother's old upright piano. I'm holding his little hand and telling him that he is the best little sea monkey there ever was. "Yes, you are. Oh, yes, you are, sweetheart. Lord, would you look at what shoes I'm wearing? I haven't thought of those shoes in years. Bandolinos. Everybody thought that was something to have an Italian shoe being sold right here in Fulton. And they had little different colored straps trimming them out. Otherwise, it would have just been a plain old Mary Jane. They were soft. Mine were black with red straps, and I always wore them when I had cafeteria duty because they were so comfortable I could slip up on somebody doing something he ought not to be doing, like dotting his milk straw into his beets so he could shoot out little purple cubes at the girl beside him. Lord, what a mess. I need to get back home, and there I am back in the den in our little breakfast nook. A lot of people don't like pine paneling, but I do. I love it. My children saw all kinds of things there in the knotholes. There was a deer and a little elf. I'm not sure why, but our daughter Lynette always called that elf Doo-Doo, and she was scared of him and would say at almost every meal for about a year, "Doo-Doo is watching me." Sadie paused, remembering where she really is. Pine Haven, wheelchair, Stanley Stone across from her. It has started to happen more and more, and it takes a minute to know where she is. She opened her eyes, expecting him to roar out some nasty expletive, as he often does in the dining room if anyone mentions anything to do with bodies. But instead, his eyes were filled with tears, his mouth opened in a silent cry. "Oh, Stanley, I'm so sorry. I had an ugly brown car Ned called Doo-Doo," he said, and they both laughed, Sadie relieved that the word hadn't taken him off in the wrong direction. "And remember that guy they called Doo-Doo Pendergraph ran the Gulf Station?" She did indeed. Doo-Doo was in her class in school, and so was Boobs Walters and Goat Baumgarten. She laughed to say all those names, to imagine what somebody from out of town like Rachel Silverman would think. "I miss my tool shed," Stanley said. "That's where I went when you started talking." Ned once painted the walls without asking. He painted his name and he painted an airplane. He sat forward and put his face in his hands. He loved when we played airplane. I'd lie on my back and he'd hold my hands and press his stomach against my feet, and then up, I'd lift, and he'd hold out his arms and make engine sounds. "Children love to paint," Sadie said, "and they all love to fly." "I made him scrub the walls of my shed and then paint it all white," he says. "I'm pretty sure I took a belt to him for not asking. But he turned out fine, Stanley." She watched him slump forward again, his face hidden. "He hit a rough patch, but we all do." She was rolling toward him, but then he sat up so fast with an awful glare on his face that made her drop her glue stick. "But not as fine as the goddamned undertaker," he said. "This ain't the Sistine Chapel, woman. Get the lead out." "I take my art seriously," Sadie said, her hand to her chest, still catching her breath. "I don't do cheap and sloppy work, and I never have, so if you're feeling impatient, perhaps you should take a recess and let me get back to you." She pointed to her glue stick where it has rolled under a table. "And pick that up before you excuse yourself. Hell, you got a whole line of people in the hall waiting for some idiot picture, and I will see each and every one. Don't you ever get tired of this? Don't you want something for yourself?" "Of course I do. I have a whole scrapbook of me." She reached her hand for him to hand her the glue stick and then carefully went back to work, applying a thin line and then gently blending it. She blew to help dry the glue and then handed him his picture much sooner than she normally would. "Hold the edges or you'll ruin it. I could show you sometime, my pictures." "Yeah, whatever." "The first one I ever did was to put myself with my mother. She died when I was 4. I only have a few pictures of her, so she looks just the same every single time, but I keep getting bigger and older until now there I am with my beautiful mother, and I look like her grandmother. Isn't that funny? I fixed it so we're holding hands." She looks up, but he is gone, and the clock on the wall says it's 10 o'clock, which is milk break at school. It costs 3 cents a carton, and she keeps a jar on her desk to pay for those who forget their money. The note on the wall says not to forget to go to lunch. Do not forget to go to lunch. Do not forget. And that's Sadie. Thank you, and I'm going to shift gears and give you a sense of a different voice. I think I'll skip in so that I have some time. This is another resident who lives in one of the cottages. She's not in the main building yet. And all these people who don't know her refer her to her as the lesbian school teacher from South Carolina. Her name is Toby Tyler. Her given name was Annabelle Tyler. She's changed it herself to Toby because she felt like she was looking for a circus and had no family and kind of roamed about looking for the right place to retire and spend her life. So here she is, and I'll try not to keep you too long. And I think some of the other characters, Abby is a little girl next door. Rachel Silverman has been mentioned. You'll see Stanley and Sadie again. So there are times when the whole room full of people are talking, so I'll do my best to keep the voices separate. Oh, Marge. Marge is very self-righteous and kind of a big leader in the group. Now Toby takes a stroll over to the main building to find some of the others gathered for lunch. It's a high-class joint in many ways. She never in her life stopped what she was doing for a formal lunch and then tea in the afternoon, but now she absolutely loves it. It ends up getting kind of heated sometimes, which is what she loves best. People fight over chairs, things like that, things they taught you not to do in kindergarten, and yet everybody has circled right back around to it. I want to sit with so-and-so. That's my chair. You're in my chair. Marge Walker always gets there early and plants her dress to the nines fanny in the big red leather wingback like she's the queen. Often Marge is on a rant about how she's tired of prisoners being treated like vacationers with hard-working taxpayers footing the bill, how those prisoners get to eat 3 meals a day and watch television, and how she's also sick and tired of the foreigners taking up space in the produce section. The people? Toby once asked. No, I mean all that mess that comes from Mexico or wherever. 10 kinds of peppers nobody ever heard of. Who wants it? Today, Marge is saying how she isn't going to sign a thing that turns anything over to her children. She said if they want to circle in like vultures for her money, so be it. But she plans to spend every single cent to stay alive as long as she possibly can. I'm going to live so long they'll be sorry. Let's all tell what makes us mad, Stanley Stone says. Well, I can tell you about my life as a teacher. A damn good teacher, too, Toby says, and how I told those young girls, don't let me hear you complaining about your periods anymore, because if you're not having one, it means one of two things. Either some boy's been parking overtime where he should have pulled out, or you're up to no good with your own precious bodies, starving and vomiting and messing up nature's beautiful patterns. She stops and goes to adjust the oxygen tubes leading to Larice Boone's oxygen tank. She tells Larice that's the payment for all those years smoking, that she herself might need oxygen one of these days because she also smoked like a fiend for many years. Yes, that was the price. I told those girls, someday you'll be wishing for your period, and I don't just mean to make sure you aren't pregnant. Knocked up, and they looked at me with their mouths all screwed up like I was stupid, and what could I possibly mean? I said, when you get old like moi here, she slaps her chest and grimaces, pulls her pants leg up over the top of her boots to show a white, scaly-looking leg. I told him, I said, everything stops. The faucet goes off. It's like the scene in Lost Horizon that I had them watch in English class after reading the novel. I said, you want some fantasy, a real stretch of the imagination, and yet something that still is real in all the right ways? I made them remember that one scene in the movie where the beautiful woman is taken from Shangri-La and poof, dries up to an old brown potato chip like what you used to find down in the bottom of the bag. Lay's and most of them have corrected this, which is a shame, because it was that old brown crunchy one there at the bottom that made me enjoy all the others more, you know? Like I pointed out to them, you need to enjoy those smooth, pretty faces and natural colored, thick hair and breasts that are healthy and cancer-free and don't pull you down to Hades when you stand up. Or as Emily Dickinson might say, I like a look of agony because I know it's real. True, real. You were some teacher, Rachel Silverman says. I'm surprised they let you retire. She was forced to retire, Marge says, and her name's not Toby. She made that up when she moved in out here, and everybody knows it. Well, I don't know it, Rachel says, and I still say she must have been a wonderful teacher. Well, the jury's still out on that, Toby says. Though, yes, I think I was a really great teacher. And you're so modest, Marge says. And no telling what you were teaching there in the locker room with those girls. I smell a cat fight, Stanley says. You know what? You can't hurt me any more than I have already been hurt in life, so just give it up. You're ignorant, and I'd rather be who I am and smart than who you are and ignorant. Who you are is a sin. Well, it's nobody's business who I am, Marge. I got all kinds of rules for good living, and you don't match any of them, Toby says. For instance, I say you should be kind to others. I say 'tis better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and remove all doubt. I say your pee should always run clear, which means you got to drink a lot throughout the whole day to keep yourself pure and cleansed. The question is what you drink, Marge says, and gets several laughs. She settled back into her big chair, scared to death somebody else will sit there. Always take the stairs, Toby says, because Marge is always using the elevator, and then turns to Sadie. Unless you can, of course. Let's see, stretch your spine each day like you're wringing out a sponge. Just sit in a chair and go from side to side like this. She demonstrates, and they hear her back pop. And think of at least one thing that makes you laugh. For me, it's just an orgasm a day, Stanley says. And several laugh, rain or shine, every day. There you go, Toby says. That's the kind of laughing I mean, but none of us want to dwell too long on that image now, do we? No, sirree, we sure don't. But I'll tell you, I was a good teacher, and it only started getting hard for me when everything changed. Like one day I was a normal teacher. Marge sighs and shifts around in her seat until Stanley asks, does she have to use the bathroom or does she have St. Vitus? Sadie whispers something about worms and needing to check her bottom, which makes several people giggle and makes Marge rise up like a cobra, but Toby can't even stop to laugh. Then next thing I knew, the children were coming in with names like Bandana and Eurasia and Montpelier. And I said, those are things and places, children, and you are people. What on earth is going on? And there were names I couldn't even pronounce, and I can guarantee you that you don't readily go calling names you can't say. I'm looking for the Johns and Bills and Toms, and they weren't there anymore. I had to write a phonetic spelling alongside each and every child by the time I retired. Got fired, Madge says. But I was a teacher long ago, too, and so I know what you're talking about. I also hated multiculturalism. That's not what I said, Toby says. I don't hate multiculturalism. You are worse than Fox News. It was the white ones, too. It was equal opportunity weird names. I'd hear mamas calling them in and sounded like they were hawkers for a law firm. Parker, Ramsey, and Tate. Parker, Ramsey, and Tate. And next thing you know, up runs three little towheads like dandelion puffs, all decked out in sailor suits. You are describing my grandchildren who were just here, Marge says. How dare you use their names? I did it because their daddy is trying to get you to die early so he can have your money. He wants to buy those children a boat to go with their outfits. You did it because you are the word that means a female dog. Marge is red in the face, jowls quivering. People like you are always frustrated now, aren't you? Only by people like you. Nothing about me has slipped. I just decided to move on in here early and get a good hard look at where I'm headed. She unzips her fanny pack but doesn't reach in. She has got a little tin of skulls in there and cannot wait to get a bit of it up against her gum. She will be buzzing like a cowgirl riding the range, and she can't wait. Welcome home, tapping cowgirl. Where have you been? That voice in her head will say. And when I look at some of you, I can tell it's not a pretty sight, she says. Her hands are shaking, and she feels like she might cry, which makes her furious. Be sure your sins will reveal themselves. Good, Toby says. I hope so. I'm so tired of people like you, Snowflake, Lily White, Holy Roller. She pauses, looking over at Abby, but then decides to go for broke. Asshole. Want to stick a great big stereotype on me that I'm a certain way. You going to point to Rachel Silverman there and say she's stingy or something about her schnoz? Because that's a stereotype. Or are you going to point over there at Susie Mitchell and Mr. McIntyre and say they must be eating some fried chicken and watermelon all day while waiting on a welfare check? And Lottie there and Miss Locklear better stay away from the firewater. Mr. McIntyre has a tail and Rachel Silverman has horns on her head. I would find that immensely attractive, Stanley Stone says. Her horns, that is, not his tail. No offense. He nods at Mr. McIntyre, who says none taken, all the while reaching his hand to rub the base of his spine to make certain there's nothing there. Well, first, I'm a person, Toby continues. I'm a human, a woman. I was an English teacher and a bit of an amateur writer myself, but I'll tell you, things went so far off course, I just didn't even know where I was anymore. I think it was the beginning of the end, too. What once was generous compassion for high school students with all their angst and crap going on turned into pure tea agitation and fury. I didn't get frustrated by who I am. I got frustrated by what they were reading and wanting to write about. I said, you're too smart for this. Dwarves and wizards and gnomes and vampires, big blue aliens with tails like monkeys. I said what I wouldn't give for a good old-fashioned story about somebody losing his or her virginity or getting an abortion. Grandma died, and for the first time I knew I was mortal. Or what about the one where the boy doesn't want to kill a deer, but Granddaddy makes him so he can be a man? I was wanting to write something myself, and it was dying to get out of my head, but couldn't find the door. It was also plugged up with that malarkey. I think of my head as my apartment, Toby says, because she's on a roll now, full speed ahead. I have lived up here in my head my whole life. I climb those steps each and every day, and there's always a little voice saying, welcome home, Toby. Come on in, girl. You made it one more day. Which is why, she glares at Marge, it doesn't really matter where I live. The building and walls where I stay is just the foyer to where I really live. Foyer, Madge corrects. Some English teacher. Whatever, look it up. I say foyer. But I didn't want to have to give it all up. I had worked so hard, and all I was longing for was some whining boy who didn't want to kill a deer. I was craving one, in fact, would have loved him and given him an instant A. Where did all the orphans go? Jane and Oliver and Pip. It's an honorable and very dramatic position. And the girl who's upset to have a period, where does she go? Or the one all torn up about losing her virginity, where does she go? If they're still out there, they're keeping a low profile and hiding from all those getting boobs for Christmas and graduation and making themselves up to look 30. Well, I'll tell you what I wanted. I wanted dead deers and dead grandparents and busted condoms. I wanted anything other than a zombie or a shape-shifting demon wolf coyote. What am I to do with a bunch of aliens at Armageddon? I'd run like hell, Mr. McIntyre said. Toby, so Sadie says, honey, I think you might need to settle down. This isn't good for you. It's in the past, remember? And now you're traveling all over the world on vacation, riding horses in the photos and such, remember? And it's recess now. Sit up straight. Sip your tea. Sadie's sweet and Toby loves her to death, but she still can't stop. She's thought these things for such a long, long time, and now it feels so good, like opening Pandora's box and getting rid of all that bad stuff. Some of them said about their papers, I meant to be vague, like that might excuse something that didn't make a goddamn bit of sense. Or the one who said, I just didn't get what he was doing because it was so brilliant. I took my work seriously, and where did it get me? Where? Fired would be my guess. Yes, that's right. She turns and steps toward Madge, Stanley meowing in the background. Fired. There I was asking for a little reality, and who wouldn't be after Columbine? What teacher on the planet worth her salt after Virginia Tech didn't study her classroom windows and doors and the desk arrangements and hatch some plan for how she would protect all those young bodies, even the ones that got on her last goddamn nerve? And then this one boy, meaning to push my button, this one boy named something like Montreal Fedora, offered up some literary criticism on the death of Julius Caesar. He said, and I quote, "Them dudes was mean as shit, weren't they?" And I said, those dudes were mean as shit. That is what I got in trouble for. Some kid in there, probably Parker, Ramsey, or Tate, went home and tattled. Not about what was being discussed in class, but that the teacher said shit. "Miss Tyler, come to the office, please," she mimics. "Miss Tyler, please come to the office." This had happened many times. I made a notch on my desk, in fact, every time it happened, and one whole side looked like a fine-tooth comb. My principal was about 14 and had never read Shakespeare. How'd I know? I asked him one day. In that moment when I needed him on my side, I almost wished that I hadn't done that, or that I had been a teacher who did not argue against prayer in my class, which I had done for years, or did not allow hats. But what in the hell did I care if they wore hats? Some of them might have been sporting bad haircuts they were ashamed of, or keeping their lice locked in. What did I care? I didn't tell on kids who refused to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance either. I figured we'd have plenty of battles to fight, and I needed to choose the most important. I mean, these are humans growing up and witnessing the uterus as a competitive sporting arena. Who would have ever thought that? Irresponsible birth control will get you a TV show and a magazine cover. Octo, sexto, moron. You should have been fired a century ago. At 2, Marge, I said to my principal, the boy king, I asked him, if I retire like you say I have to, who will teach these children? Who will guard the gate? Who can promise me they'll tell the boys to keep their trousers zipped and tell the girls not to go promising things they don't intend to deliver? Who will teach birth control? Who will teach the value of literature? I said, who will tell them nobody gives a shit about how dwarves and trolls have sex? If they had, the Brothers Grimm would have figured it out and already done it. They had every opportunity. What I wouldn't have given for one stained soul, one good stained soul, murder, suicide, adultery, a simple lie or betrayal. I wanted a stain or a tear in a soul, and I wanted a vivid description of some place in the world that leaves me feeling like I was there. Like when Sadie tells us about her kitchen, or when she takes us to places like India and Scotland. I mean, we can all think of a place, and we all have stains on our souls. Speak for yourself. I am speaking for myself, and you know what? I'm proud to say I've done so most of my life. It might not have amounted to much, but I did my best. And these children with their new words and crazy names, God help them, are the next frontier. And we have to trust that something good will happen. Someone like Abby there will remember me on this day and all that I've said. I promise, Abby says and raises her hand. It makes Toby feel like she might cry, and she's already running short on breath and needs to pee like a racehorse. Thank you, she says. You can save this world, Abby. You can make a difference. She heads off to her cottage before anybody can see her cry. She waves her hand over her head, a signal that it ain't over. She hears Marge say, good riddance. She hears Stanley say, I love a woman with a good set of horns. Parents have also questioned your character, the boy principal had said that day in his office. He chose that word very carefully, and he could not make eye contact. Oh, really? Yes. And what is it they question? All these years, and this is what I come to? She stood still, waiting, and he still did not look up at her. She could hear students jumping up to peek in the high window of the door. She could hear bus duty announcements on the PA system, and still he did not look up, his hand resting on a typed written letter, a file folder with her name on it. A student reported you looked at her inappropriately. Who said that? I'd rather not say just yet, he said to the blotter on his desk. Does anything come to mind you'd like to say? Sure. I say a lot of things and give them a lot of looks, and who wouldn't? Bare butt cracks with underwear that's nothing more than floss? You want me to act like it's okay for a young, educated woman to squat and give that show? Is that what you would do? Sit there and watch while the young men are so torn, some looking away in embarrassment and others filling their eyeballs and then their pockets? All I did was say, where is your self-respect, honey? Is it because I said honey? Was I wrong to call her honey? If so, then let's blame the South. Let's blame generations of sweet talk and euphemism. People like you, Marge had said, people like you, like anyone even knows. No, the one and only thing she agrees with Marge about is the business about living as long as you can. Sometimes your only chance to beat prejudice is to outlive it. And she may not be able to live long enough for everything to be fixed and accepted, but she's already lived to see a lot of change. And when all is said and done, that's all that really matters. That's all that's really important. She was a good teacher. She was a good daughter. She has some good friends. And once upon a time, she even knew love. She drinks lots of water every day, and she can recite important literature at the drop of a hat. She can climb the stairs of her head and give a recitation at any time of day or night. She has a good, strong pulse and a heart like a V8 engine. And if she had the chance to do it all over again, she would not ask for a different life at all. She has loved her life. But what she would ask for is a different world. This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. Damn right, Emily. You're damn right.